we have this discussion of metadata, and I listen really carefully to what the whistleblowers say, and in particular Russ Tice. He has an interview with James Corbett, and he talks about basically a surveillance system that's way more invasive than metadata. And that was confirmed in my conversation with Thomas Drake and some of my reading of Bill Binney. So basically we have what I call we have a timid discourse about metadata, and we have a sobering discourse about total electronic surveillance.
Hmm.
And I'm just wondering, what do you think of those two competing discourses? I mean, the obvious question is that the government. This is what Mr. Drake said. The government has the upper hand, and that's why the discussion is oriented just around metadata, or not completely, but to a large extent.
They're
So,
setting the terms of the debate. And even when we're talking about metadata, they want it to be exclusively about phone metadata collected under Section 215 in the United States. People should know that there is a largely redundant system of phone metadata collection under EO 12333. So to go back, there's the stuff that is authorized by specific legislation, and we're largely talking about Section 702 and other Patriot Act authorities and the FISA Amendments Act, FISA more largely drawn. So those are the things that are bound by law in this country, and they generally only cover collection within the bounds of this country, and to some degree on Americans who are overseas. So that's the only thing that has any kind of limits on it. And everything else is collected under an executive order, EO 12333, which was first drafted under Reagan. And it's a very squishy order. It has been known to have its content changed without the letter of the executive order being changed. So it just, to some degree, anything goes. There's less oversight over EO 12333 collection than there is over CIA covert ops. So in other words, there's less oversight over that collection
okay,
than there was over the torture program.
right,
And I mean that very seriously, and people should think about the implications of that. So, there's a lot more metadata than what the government has very deliberately been trying to talk about. So there was internet metadata collection under Patriot Act authorities. There still is
right,
phone metadata. There is a completely redundant system of internet and phone metadata collection that they get overseas, which as far as we know could just mean, a cable landing just off the shore of the United States. And the protections on all of that, which remember is redundant, so they can get the same phone records from that collection as they can get from the domestic collection, the protections are weaker there. So, for example, on the domestic collection, they have to say, we're not targeting this person because of First Amendment activities. We've done a review, and we're not targeting Marcy Wheeler just because of the nasty things she says online. The EO 12333 doesn't have that limit.
right,
Also doesn't have a limit, doesn't have this, it has limits, but it doesn't have the same limits on how you can disseminate the information. So the NSA actually very deliberately trains its analysts to say, when you do a search, figure out whether you can do the same search under EO 12333, because then we don't have to abide by these nasty limits the FISA court gives us.
right,
In addition, we need to think of metadata more broadly, because in the internet sphere, it also means cookies. And it means cookies and a lot of other things. But once you get to, and what they do is they match, what's your phone identity, what's your internet identity, what's your cookies identity. And that very quickly gets you into the kind of profile that Drake and Tice have talked about. That's when you get to see where you've searched, what kinds of sites you've visited. That's probably the beginning of how they get to your porn surfing history online, right?
mm-hmm.
And so they, one of the first things they do is they create this profile of a person, and the name is, they like to say over and over again, well, we don't know the name, but the name is entirely meaningless. What is meaningful is that a human being is at the center of all of these multifarious identities, both on phones and online, and that person is somebody that they can target.
Right.
And then we know that either the FBI or the NSA, probably both, collect a lot of other different kinds of data. I first figured out they were using Section 215 for bulk collection on some scale. When I learned that they had figured out who in Aurora, Colorado, back in 2009, had bought certain kinds of beauty supplies that are precursors to chemicals, to explosives. So things like acetone and hydrogen peroxide. They went and they figured out who in that city where there had been, somebody planning for a terrorist attack, who had bought very common beauty supplies.
Mm-hmm.
And they cross-referenced it. They appear to have cross-referenced it with a list to find the people who bought beauty supplies who might know this terrorist. Okay? You should expect that they've done the same thing with fertilizer. That's something that has gotten mentioned. We should assume they're doing the same thing with pressure cookers.
Mm-hmm.
So, 3 degrees of separation from Osama bin Laden plus pressure cooker will get you wiretapped in a certain way. They've talked about credit card records. And Snowden did this in his most recent speech, his most recent chat, that once they get bulk collection of credit card records via whatever means, and anything that's not heavily encrypted transiting wires they can get, and they can get from other means, then they're able to draw the kinds of pictures that Snowden and others have talked about. Where did you eat on July 19th, 2009? Well, they can grab that from credit card records. There are other kinds of financial transfer records that we know other parts of the government get. FBI certainly has the authority to get. And it's unclear how all of this information... I mean, that's one of the reasons why I emphasize that we're still not seeing what FBI and National Counterterrorism Center do. And in those black holes, they are invited to get all of this information and put it all together. So medical records are another thing that we have strong reason to believe they've collected. There's even hints that they've collected gun purchase records.
Sure.
Which would be... there have been two quote-unquote terrorists in this country who have used guns. Nidal Hassan is one. Both of them targeted military targets, so technically they're not even terrorists, although they are, extremist ideology Muslims.
Right.
But if they're collecting gun records, they're doing it. They may be doing it with a counterterrorism claim, but they're doing it for other reasons, and they're using the database for other reasons. And I would love to have a gun registry, but I would, if we're going to have one, let's do it legally through Congress rather than backdoor. And that, by the way, is one of the things that Republicans have talked about. And at the same time as the NRA got involved in this, Republicans talked about the possibility they were getting gun records. I think it is a quite significant possibility, and if that's true, that would explain one reason why Republicans have gotten a lot more interested in pursuing this.